Good morning, dear friends. Today is day number 98 of our run/exercise. Yesterday I ran out a little bit later and left without the phone. So I'll try to summarize both dedications. Good morning to you today. Yesterday was dedicated to Anne Glover, and today is to George Burroughs. And this was to contrast with the dedication that I did last time to Churchill, and to the idea that the word or the pen is mightier than the sword. So Anne Glover was the last woman who was hanged in Boston, Massachusetts in 1688 for accusation of witchcraft. And the reason you can say she was hanged perhaps was because she was simply different and her language was difficult to comprehend. What do I mean by that? She was Irish and she was Roman Catholic, and the people in Boston, Massachusetts, were Puritans, which means that they were from England and were Protestants wanting to become more pure with the Church of England, and wanted to have all the others, non-Protestants, cleared out of their midst, which would include obviously the Roman Catholics. So the Anne Glover was a very sad story. She was an Irish woman who, when Cromwell conquered Ireland, she was taken away with her husband, deported and taken to Barbados, where she worked on a sugar plantation. Her husband was there killed supposedly because he refused to renounce his Catholic faith. And then in 1680 she moved to Boston, where she was working as a housekeeper for the John Goodwin and his family. In 1688 she was hanged, and shortly before that, the way it happened was the daughter of the Goodwins at the age of 13, Martha, accused, I think it was 1687, the Maria, the daughter of Anne Glover, that she stole some of her linen. And an argument ensued where Anne was talking to Martha, and after that, and the rest of the children, and after that, some of the children started behaving in strange ways. And when they got the doctor over, the doctor could not solve their diagnosis. And obviously he was paid, did not want to ruin his name, and so he said, that's witchcraft, can't solve it. And then they arrested her and blamed her with witchcraft. So when they put her, the Reverend Cotton Mather, M-A-T-H-E-R, was in charge of those processions, and also in charge of George Burroughs' death. An interesting story, he was the only minister killed in the Salem witch trials. So that will be in Massachusetts, but different town, not in Boston. So back to Anne Glover. she was put on trial, and they couldn't understand what she was talking. They thought she speaks the devil language, but she was actually speaking in Irish. They got some people to translate, and when her accuser, Cotton Mather, asked her if she prayed to demons, the translator said she prays to a host of spirits. And by that, what she meant, she was praying to saints. They went to examine her home and found that she had different dolls, their crude dolls, and they thought this was kind of like the voodoo dolls. But in fact, most likely they were the crude representations of different saints. Doctors checked her, and 5 out of 6 said that she was sane. And she was hanged. But right before she hanged, she said that she forgave all the people who were accusing her. And one thing that they said was that, good morning, Ross. One thing that, doing a little warm up. One thing that she said, I'm talking about Anne Glover, which you spoke yesterday about. So one thing people used to believe is if you can't recite the Lord's Prayer, that means that you're a witch. So she could not recite in English. She recited in Irish and in broken Latin. That wasn't good enough for them. So they still hanged her. And November 16th is announced by Boston to be the Goody Glover Day. So in her memory, the Reverend who was also killed, George Burroughs, who was hanged, the only minister, hanged. Interesting life. He was from England, born in 1650, and he finished Harvard with honors. He entered there when he was 20 years old, and then was hired as the minister for Salem. And it's interesting that Salem will have this horrific deaths when in fact Salem or Salem, however one pronounces the place, actually stands for Shalom, which means peace. But the people there were apparently very fractionated and very argumentative. And
striving for peace.
They were yes.
It was their hope.
It was their hope. Yeah, it's funny how you have the names not exactly fitting the actions.
Yeah, it's a basic concept. You name things you like. So when you go to a pizza and proclaim that the best pizza in town, you know it's not the best. The best pizza in town never calls itself the best pizza in town. They have a brand, they have a name. Instead, people focus on things they truly lack.
Interesting. I like that thought. A very interesting concept. So, anyway, he left Salem because of payments. They owed him money. They didn't want to pay him the salary they promised. So he left to Maine, and then the Indians were attacking the colony there, and so there were a lot of refugees. They left that town, and eventually he moved back to Salem. His accusers were people who wanted to collect some debt from him, or I wasn't exactly clear, or owed him some money. So they accused him, and at that time they allowed spectral ideas to proofs to enter the court. And that means that if, let's say, I had a dream, and in the dream I saw that Anne Glover came and was trying to suffocate me, I would be able to admit that. And indeed, those kind of proofs used for Anne Glover's accusation, and the fact that she had a cat also that looked very fierce, and the people wanted to kill that cat, but a friend of hers didn't let them kill the cat. So if you had that, then you could bring it. And people said that the same stories about the minister, that they had dreams that he was trying to suffocate them, and they decided, even though he was at a different place, different time, I mean the same time, different place, they would be able to use that as evidence against him. But the interesting thing is, when he was standing on the ladder, he spoke to the people in front, and in such a convincing way that people started crying, and there was the feeling that they would change their mind and not hang him. What's more, he recited beautifully the Lord's Prayer in English, and yet they hanged him. And Cotton Mather, the reverend who was overseeing those accusations, sitting on a horse up high, said, well, occasionally the devil stands there and reads to him the information, and that's why he knew. And if you didn't believe in the idea of witches, then you were a heretic, you didn't believe in God, because that means you don't believe in angels.
So the person who was on the horse was another reverend?
Yeah.
Competitive business. Literally.
Yes, and the other thing was, they claimed that it's impossible for a human to be that strong, because he was able to lift with his pinky. He put his pinky in the musket, right in the hole, dulak, whatever that's called, the dulak.
In the
barrel of the musket. Thank you. And he was able to lift the musket, and they believed one could not achieve that without a diabolical power. So that was, and he was handsome, you know, and even though he was only a village minister, he was able to have a rich widow want to marry him. So after he died, soon after, the Boston government admitted they were wrong, and they awarded £50 to his children and family, but they were bickering about how to share that money instead of trying to do something with it for his memory. Anyway, so again, as I said, I dedicated it to these people because I wanted to contrast it with words being effective in saving people. Words could be used, as we say, the pen is mightier than the sword, or the word is mightier than the sword in this case. The argument Anne Glover had with Martha and the kids maybe did kind of make them scared and behave in a strange way. And the fact that she could not speak the language made her misunderstood. People can make even a minister who followed all the rules, even able to say the Lord's Prayer. They will be able to convince people he can be hanged. And in today's world, we still have what we call witch hunts, where people just want to accuse someone because they don't like him, or perhaps they're afraid of those people. So hopefully tolerance and wisdom will one day reach, and one day we'll look at other trials and think, how could they have done that? Just like yesterday we look at the Salem trials over 300 years later and say, this was crazy. We're going to now dedicate a hill to them or a day to them. And one of Nathaniel Hawthorne's, interestingly, grandfather was one of the judges in those trials, in the Salem witch trials, and he claimed that he did the right thing. He was still convinced about that. And Nathaniel Hawthorne would later write the Scarlet Letter, a very strong and deep story. Highly recommend to those who didn't read it to read it or listen to the audiobook.